Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Debbie. If you want to go ahead, it's 9 o'clock. For those of you that are just joining us, we have the Padlet, which is where we store all of our resources. If you look at my screen, the Padlet will pop up and look like this. If you scroll from the bottom across, you'll see where we have stored all the content for session 3. And that column kind of has its own cursor roller thing. I don't know what to call it. And that's where you can find the sign in for today. So, but I also dropped the sign in the chat.
Yeah, and to address a question earlier this morning, so that you have a list of all the dates to add to your calendar, we've included those on all of our presentations. It is a slide that is immediately after the survey. So it has a slide that shows all of the PDs that we're doing through the literacy unit, through the SST, and the Literacy Leaders Network is there with all the dates. So that might be helpful. If I know that we have had, just so you also know, we've had we're changing over our servers. So if you have sent us emails or communications in the last few weeks and didn't get a response from us, it is because we didn't get it through the server changeover. So you may need to resend any communication that you sent to Jackie or I in the last couple weeks. But anyway, welcome. So Ohio State fans, you're very happy this morning, or not happy this morning. Alabama fans, you're very happy. So I'm a die-hard Michigan fan, and so I could not root for Ohio State. So, oh, actually, I have a colleague. So we're probably all tired from staying up late watching the game. But welcome. We're so happy to have all of you here. Jackie and I were talking, and we were sure that with the new year and the changes and going back face to face, that probably your plates are pretty full right now. So we will be very cognizant of your time because we know that you are very busy. Can you switch the next slide, Jackie?
Yes, sorry, I'm direct messaging those people that showed up a little late so that wasn't clogging everyone's feed, or not late, but right on time, with the Padlet and the sign-in. So if you did not receive that, just send me a direct message and I will send it directly to you.
So we're going to be talking about the topic of assessment. Make sure you have access to the Padlet. And be prepared to share your response from the resources that you chose last month in your group, because we will be spending time going over that. Make sure that you sign in the Padlet. Everything is linked there where Jackie just pointed out a little bit earlier. And then just briefly look over our commitments, which this is such a great group. So the agenda for today is that we will be starting our discussion. Those are what we lovingly call the elevator speeches, where you can give your reaction to the resources that you looked at over the last month. We'll be talking at a surface level about assessment types and planning across your districts, and creating a format that we can access, that every child in your building will have access to those assessments. Then we'll be following hopefully a rich discussion over, what's happening in your districts and how you go about planning your assessments and making sure that you're assessing the correct things, and then doing a reflection. So in our series, we've talked about the importance of your role as leadership, because none of this happens without you. We've talked about the simple view of reading and connected to Scarborough's rope. And now we're moving on to assessment, and all of these are connected. So when we're looking at assessment, we need to make sure that they match up to those very important skills that go along with the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope. So our outcomes for today is we're going to overview and look at some examples and barriers of the 4 different types of assessments. So we'll be looking at screening, diagnostic, progress monitoring, and then those big outcome assessments. Looking at, do you have the right assessments to make the important decisions that you need to make to guide instruction and to increase student achievement? And then, do all learners, regardless of disability or placement, have access to those assessments? Quick review, when we talked about literacy, we talked about the simple view, so we have to have both. We have to have that word recognition side, and then we have to have that language comprehension side in order to get reading comprehension. So to put reading comprehension as a goal just isn't going to cut it. We're going to have to back up and see where those gaps lie. First, looking at the word recognition side to make sure that there isn't a gap there. If everything is solid there, then we can move on to the language comprehension as well for students to be skillful readers. This all aligns to Ohio's plan to raise literacy, which has equity for all students, and we're using literacy as a lever for school improvement. So when we're looking at this, in order for all kids to be able to read, we need to make sure that we have enough capacity by all of the professionals that are working with those kids. And that also includes leadership, who helps build those systems so that the capacity of all of our professionals can be increased in language and literacy. And that we need to make sure that all learners are represented as readers, from the most complex needs to the most gifted, and every student that falls in between, that all of those students are represented and that they have access to curriculum and assessments. And then the ultimate goal that all students can read. So, when we looked at the science of reading, we know that the science has shown us that with the correct instruction, we know that 90 to 95% of all students, including those with disabilities, can achieve literacy levels at grade level or approaching grade level. All right, so bearing that in mind, and that's the predisposition that we're coming into, thinking about that we can, through correct and explicit instruction, access to systematic tiered instruction, that we can get all kids to read. So all kids have to receive Tier 1 core instruction. And none of the Tier 2 and Tier 3 should not happen until all kids have received that core Tier 1 instruction. They cannot be pulled out during Tier 1 instruction, because then if they're pulled out during core Tier 1 instruction, that Tier 2 has now become their core 1. So we need to make sure that that Tier 2 intervention is in addition to and not in place of that core instruction. And then for our kids with the highest needs, once they have Tier 1 and they have Tier 2, then we can go to that one-on-one Tier 3 interventions, which are in addition to those other two. And again, they can't be pulled out of Tier 1, they can't be pulled out of Tier 2. That Tier 3 is in addition to, which you all know how hard that is to work that into a schedule so that those kids can receive those instructions at the proper time. So that's not an easy ask. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the content from the research reviews. And so the system, we're going to just have an open discussion this time rather than going into breakout rooms, but share your resource, any takeaways that you have. We're looking for each group to share about 5 minutes. So I don't know if you had a speaker or if each one is going to share a little bit, but each team will share, and then we'll hold the questions for the end after each team has shared with the group.
To kind of, I know that there's a lot of new faces here today, and we appreciate you guys being here. So to give you some background, what we did in our last session is we did some content around the simple view of reading in Scarborough's Grove. Everyone's coming into this network with a different entry. So we wanted to allow opportunities for groups to be able to network together in a smaller group by reviewing a resource from one of the literacy leads from the Department of Education. So each group had 3 options to watch one of those videos from those literacy leads, or to read an article by Louisa Moats, who is one of the gurus in the area of literacy. So the groups got together, they picked which video they would want to watch or resource they would like to review. And then we ended up having 3 groups. So the group 1 was Amy, Megan, and Maria from TPS. And they chose Grounded in the Science of Reading by Michelle Elia. Group 2 was Stephanie, Karen, and Courtney, and they chose the same resource. Group 3 was Bill, Sarah, and Jenny, as well as Melissa, and they selected resource 1, which was Carolyn Turner's Introduction on the Science of Reading. Okay, and we asked the groups to kind of look at these through the lens of how they may, build their own capacity with it, but is this a tool that you could use later and have embedded into your PD planning as you continue to roll this information out to your staff? And that all 4 of those resources noted are just here under this session 2. So you got resource 1, resource 2, resource 3, and resource 4 that you can feel free to go back and peruse at your own time. So Debbie, how did you want to do this? Do you want to ask for a volunteer? Or do you want to just start with group 1?
Let's just start with group 1.
So group 1, Amy, Megan, and Maria.
Hi guys.
This is Amy's.
Hi.
All right, Amy, are you taking it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, I didn't even see that you were here. So go ahead, Megan. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Amy. You're more than welcome to.
Will you guys also, Amy or Megan, whoever decides to go, would you guys also share just briefly with the group, what districts you're with and maybe like your area as a group of focus?
Oh, sure. I'm Amy Raskowski, and I am a 3rd grade literacy coach in Toledo Public Schools. My job entails giving professional development to 3rd grade teachers to help students pass the OST. But I also work with K1 and 2 because we know the 3rd grade guarantee doesn't start in 3rd grade. It starts in younger grades. So I watched Michelle's video, and she is such a wonderful presenter. I mean, I love watching her videos, and actually I get so much out of it that I'm pausing the video so I can like jot down more notes, because she just had a lot of good information in the professional development that I watched. And the biggest takeaway that I had, she talked about the 4-part processing system to teach vocabulary. And I wasn't really, this was really new to me. And basically it's a step-by-step process where if you're trying to, she went through an example of the word charge, where first you count out how many like charge, getting the phonological awareness in there, and then going on to like writing the word down. So then you're moving into the orthographic, and then talking about the meaning, because charge has 2 different meanings. It could be battery or running at a quick speed. So I had never thought about teaching vocabulary that way, but I wanted to talk with our fellow colleagues at Toledo Public to see if we could incorporate this into our vocabulary PD. I kind of gave like a very general description, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm like going through my notes to see, make sure I'm getting it right. Hopefully Michelle would be proud of me for what I just said.
She totally would be.
So, but it was a very good professional development. But that was one of my biggest takeaways. I mean, she talked about the word rack with the language comp, what you guys just went over. She went over that as well. So I don't know, Megan, am I missing anything?
No, I did really like her changing emphasis of big ideas. I thought that graphic was really important to see how our foundational skills, change and alter from kindergarten through 5th grade, but how they're still important and build upon each other.
Yeah, I agree. And one big thing that for TPS, because we have a basal program we have journeys for K1, 2, and then Reading Street for grades 3, 4, 5. And she was making the emphasis that there's not a one size fit all reading program. She said like Youngstown City uses multiple curriculum programs. I think she said that they use Haggerty for phonemic awareness, which we're rolling out in TPS as well. And then she said they use something else for like comprehension, like they're using different resources. And I would love to talk with, hopefully there's somebody on this call that's in that district, because I would love to hear like what they're using. Because we've always been like a one size fits all, and I know that that's not always the case. One basal program can't hit everything.
I love that you guys oh, sorry, go
Michelle
ahead.
always says that you have to be smarter than your curriculum. So you have to look at what the kids need and then use that, fill in the gaps where the curriculum may be gapping for certain students. Now, I will also say for that group is that Michelle follows Anita Archer's vocabulary, I guess, not program, but her system. So if there are YouTube videos on that as well, that you can see Anita Archer actually doing that if you wanted to, do a little more exploration in that. But
okay. Yeah, we've seen Anita Archer. She's really good. I didn't even make that connection, but you're right. Thank you for clarifying that. But I think that was it. I'm not sure if Maria's on or not.
she said she had a meeting and might be late.
Okay.
So
no worries.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, group 1. That was awesome. Any comments around that? Okay, so let's go on to group 2.
Morning, Karen and Stephanie. I didn't know, we had talked about just kind of each giving our own little snippet. Is that still kind of the plan?
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and start. We chose the same resource as the ladies at TPS did, and Michelle was fantastic. It was a 2-hour video, and I don't know how she did it, but I felt engaged throughout the whole thing, even though it was virtual, so that was awesome. A couple takeaways that I had from her was that 4-part processor that was mentioned from Amy, and how you always need to start at the bottom. She referenced slaying the guessing monster a lot and how kids try and start at the top with the context instead of starting at the bottom with the phonology and the orthography. So that was something that I took away from her. I guess a couple of catchphrases. She mentioned the Oprah intervention where everybody kind of gets the same thing. And that is definitely not what we want to kind of spend our time and energy with our kids. It should be more focused. And then the other thing that I really liked was the Iowa graphic that she referenced. It was more of a layering, how tier 1 is the first layer, and then you layer on top of that with tier 2 and tier 3. And Debbie, I think you kind of mentioned that before as well, that you have to be adding on the supports to the kids, not taking them out of their tier 1 instruction. So those are my takeaways from Michelle's video.
I'll just add a little bit to that. I started and stopped a lot because it was 2 hours long. So I wrote notes on different pads of paper. So going back to my notes, she talked about how to, what I put in here in my notes was different names and books that could help. So I wrote those in there. But also she talked about the Haggerty website and the phonemic awareness and how that could help and be beneficial. Like Courtney said, she talked about the slaying the guessing monster. What she said with poor readers is poor readers use context to help decode, but good readers, they draw upon to help them comprehend what they are reading. I thought that was a good thing to point out. Good readers do not use context clues to decode. They use context to help with comprehension. Another thing that I thought was interesting, and we all probably know this, but it's nice that she's reiterating some of these things to keep it in the forefront. But just she had a question about testing your knowledge, and everybody took this, I guess it was a quiz, to know it was 80% of your students need to be proficient. You cannot intervene your way out of a core instruction problem. I think that that's huge. When you're not finding the results that you want, that it's more of a core instruction problem to address it that way.
Sorry, I will jump in a little bit. Everything those ladies said are all over my notes too. Admittedly, it was a while ago, so I had to scramble to find my notes to pull these back out. I didn't do a very good job summarizing at the time. I will say that last thing that Catherine just mentioned regarding the intervene your way out of the core instruction, for me was not a new concept, but it sort of re-hit me on the head with it, that we need to stop in our district. We have a lot of focus on our intervention, and we haven't done enough to provide professional development and support with resources in these concepts for our core. And we're not hitting 80% of our kids at benchmark. So for me, it was very interesting and engaging, even though it was 2 hours, but about overwhelmed me in the work that needs to be done here in our district yet. She did mention a couple of other authors and resources. I have since purchased the Kilpatrick's book, Essentials of Assessing and Preventing and Overcoming Reading Difficulties. It's this one. And I'm on chapter 3, and I feel like I've learned more in 3 chapters than I learned in my university experience, which is largely his point, in that the universities have avoided or have not taught what is researched and proven to work. So it's all a big learning curve for me, and will be for our teachers.
Yeah, so when we talk, it made me think of, Stephanie, is that Karen and your whole group, as you were talking, is that if we don't have that robust core 1 instruction, more and more kids are put into intervention that really probably don't need to be there. We can probably prevent a lot of kids from going into the need for intervention with a robust core 1 instruction. And that's the whole premise behind the science of reading, is that we have kids in interventions that shouldn't be there. If we could just get that robust core 1 instruction where it needs to be in all of those vital components that we know kids have to be skilled readers. Okay, and group 3?
We were group 3, and I'm not sure if all of our people are on right now. I'm Melissa, and we have a link to a document. We just did like a shared Google Doc to put down our thoughts and ideas about what we watched here in our video resource. So we watched the Carolyn Turner Introduction to the Science of Reading. And so if it's okay with our group, we'll just kind of go through the bullet points that we put on the sheet. And mine was the first bullet point, a takeaway from the video here. And the video, covered kind of the basics of the science of reading, or what it says exactly, the introduction of the science of reading. And one of my takeaways there was that your reading program, or your literacy program, consisting of tools that the students will need to put in their toolbox. And I've been in this game for 30 years. And so I've seen the phonics only instructions sounded out to the whole language instruction back the other way. And so I guess this squares with my thinking and my experience in teaching reading to the little ones, first grade in particular. of equipping these students with the appropriate tools needed for a good literacy program. Starting with your basics, your alphabetic principle, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary comprehension, going into those 5 big ideas of reading, teaching each of those explicitly, systematically, and then integrating everything together to be able to understand what the reading is trying to say. And it's a multi-layered process, if you will, here, and that not every student is going to develop at the same rate. Not every student is going to progress at the same rate. So we need to make sure that students are equipped with those tools before we're ready to so-called push them along, if you will. You know, it's almost like, okay, this week we're going to work on fluency, and, you know, if you can't do it, too bad, we're moving on to comprehension. So constantly cycling back. And if you look at the Ohio State standards, you know, they're repetitive from grade level to grade level to grade level, but they just become a little more complex as you get a little bit older, you know, throughout the school years. So I guess that was just kind of my takeaway, is just equipping those students with those tools and explicitly teaching those skills and integrating them all together. So I'm not sure whose bullet point in our group is next, but I'll let one of our other teammates go then.
I'll go. The second bullet point is mine. I cheated. I just did a screenshot. So one of the things that I went into the video with, and actually this whole experience with, so what can I share with all teachers, like across the district? I don't care what they teach, because we're all literacy teachers. What can I share with all teachers that that they could sort of access and sort of apply? So I liked the segment of the video that went through the myths and misconceptions. I think those are really important points to go back to again and again, because those are the exact arguments that you hear. Well, we're already doing X, Y, and Z. And then I'm a person who loves visuals, and I think that we need them. So just the 2 visuals, the simple view of reading and the rope, those 2, I feel like those should be posters. Both of those should be posters hung in every single classroom, because what a great tool that would be, even for kids to see, oh, we're working on this, and it fits with all these other things. You know, having, maybe even giving them an opportunity to set some goals for themselves, you know, all part of that sort of MTSS process. So it looks like the second bullet and the third bullet are the things that I contributed to. I have to, Melissa did all the hard work. So I came in and said, yep, I agree with those bullets. And then I'm going to add these 2.
And I did the last bullet about how to strengthen the instructional, the effective and core instruction for the teachers. It goes along with the very first bullet point. In order to be able to reach all those components, you need those other 4 sub bullets under mine to make sure that the instruction is effective, and make sure you have systematic and explicit instruction. Practices and assessments to have, you know, a content-rich and high-quality instruction materials, so the teachers have the trainings, and just like the other people on here had said about the different courses, perhaps for the teachers to have, and to be provided the opportunity to collaborate with each other. So that's, I think it builds on that first bullet point. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand of how the teachers can actually bring that into the classrooms and implement it. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Was there a 4th person in your group? Sarah? Is she with us right now?
I don't see Sarah on here.
Okay. That was amazing. And I think it was so good to hear from you guys. Just kind of as you were sharing, I was thinking, Debbie, it might be, jotted down some notes and I want to go back in and pull out some of those graphics, like the 4-pork processor and those, like the visual that Bill just shared. Some of the things that you guys shared, I'll go through that presentation, pull them out, and in our follow-up email, we'll make sure that you guys have that so you can see exactly what your colleagues are referencing.
Yes, I wrote the same thing down, Jackie.
Great. So we're just gonna thank you guys all for doing that. I know that you all have a lot on your plate. For those of you that may not be aware, those session 2, that information, I tried to take notes in the spreadsheet. And then that final group 3 that used this kind of running document, would you mind throwing the link to that document in the chat for everyone else to be able to utilize? If you don't mind sharing. And then we have some questions coming in. Can someone repeat the Anita Archer Vocabulary Program resource? What is the actual title? Debbie, can you throw that in the chat? And then any questions that you guys have.
This is the great book that she talks about that, and there's a portion in there about vocabulary. So it's just called Explicit Instruction by Anita Archer. But yes, we'll put it in there. We can also send it in the follow-up.
Okay.
You
And then
go
before
on
we move into the
YouTube.
oh, I'm sorry. What's up, Amy? I'm sorry.
If you go on YouTube and type in Anita Archer, there'll be a couple videos will pop up of her actually doing the lesson, because we incorporated that into our vocabulary PD. But I didn't know there was a book, so I need the book.
It's called Explicit Instruction. I'll put it in the follow-up email, and we'll also link it in the Padlet.
Okay.
Wonderful. Did anybody have any questions for any of the groups before we move on? Okay. Great. So our content for today is around language and literacy assessments. So we're going to be talking about assessments, but just through the lens of that language and literacy component. And one of the ways that we wanted to start this off was giving an example of a student. So meet LaToya. Okay, LaToya is a student. Let's say she's a 2nd grade student, and she has a great, robust Tier 1 curriculum available to her, and in the area of word recognition. But what we're noticing for LaToya is that she's starting to, have some difficulties with the decoding component of her ability to read. However, as educators, when we did assessments for LaToya, we started off the beginning of the school year doing, let's say, NWE MAP for LaToya, right? And it was a great, wonderful testing process, as we all know, having a 2nd grader complete MAP assessments. But LaToya, completed the entire assessment, and the results of the assessment found that she had her deficit area was coming up in the area of reading comprehension, even though she was entering that 2nd grade year with a deficit in reading decoding. Okay, so this was a red flag for her teachers, and so they put her through the Tier 2 process where she received a RIMP, and in that time with the reading specialist, she would spend 20 minutes every other day with a reading specialist going over an A to Z book that had a story at the beginning, covered some vocabulary, and then basically asked some comprehension questions. Okay, so she sat in there for, over 40 minutes a week, getting that, intense intervention in reading comprehension. Well, then when they went to go progress monitor, she wasn't making the gains that she was supposed to be making, and they're upset and hitting their head on the wall. So they, send her to their IRT team or their intervention team, because she might need some additional supports and maybe could qualify for special education services. So, they go in and they do an achievement test with a psychologist, and they do IQ and all of this, and they're still kind of seeing the same thing. And so then she gets an IEP, and in that IEP, she has a goal in the area of reading comprehension. And then she's receiving things from an intervention specialist. The intervention specialist is trying to work with the classroom teacher to, try to close this gap. But this entire time, through this entire process, we've missed an opportunity. because we relied on that NWEA MAP assessment to guide the instruction and interventions and supports that are needed for LaToya in order to really make gains to really effectively reach reading comprehension, right? We didn't go through and diagnose her specific problem to identify that it really was a reading decoding issue. So we spent all this time working in the area of reading comprehension to no avail. It got us nowhere. And unfortunately now, LaToya might have a bigger gap at this point. I'm not sure. I did make her up. But so what we're going to do today is really pull apart those different types of assessments and how do we dig down and know what assessments to use when. As you guys know, we don't have a ton of time, but we unfortunately, with the best of intentions, have a lot of students who are sitting in the same position that LaToya is. And it leads to a lot of frustration for educators and parents. And, the biggest robust part of this issue could have maybe been resolved if we had the right assessments and had a clear understanding of what assessments to use when. Okay, so just wanted to start off with an example. Because I think, we have this huge boom in data and assessments just for so many years, but we still are continuing to see the same results. So what is going on? Why is there an issue, right? So I think one of the most persistent, this is from Louisa Moats, and she says, one of the most persistent problems in classrooms is translating assessment data into differentiated instruction, as well as progress monitoring effectiveness for instruction. So, oftentimes we spend all of this time doing these assessments, which, leads to a lot of grumblings for staff, students, et cetera, and can take, a 2-week time period to administer for an entire, pre-K to 12 system. And then we kind of just have these scores and we don't really know what to do with them. So as we start to think about assessments, we need to make sure that we know how to translate those findings or what those findings tell us we need to do next. Because the analysis of that data in teams, right, is critical to ensure assessment.
Yeah, I'm still listening, but I'm not
Can link.
participating. What's up?
Stephanie, your mic is on. Appropriate, but I like that you admitted to the whole group that you're still listening. That's awesome.
No.
I'm going to go ahead and mute her for, okay, there we go. So if we don't have the right assessments, we are not going to have the right evidence-based practices in place, right? So we really want to take some time and pull that apart with the caveat of knowing that assessments, we need to assess less and teach more, right? Assessments do not change outcomes for students. Good instruction does. And I think we all know that, but I think we can sometimes get lost in the weeds of compliance and what is needed for special education or for a RIMP as it relates to these components of assessing students, and it can lead to less teaching and effective instruction taking place. So we're going to dive into the types of assessments. So I'm going to hand it over to Debbie.
So kind of piggyback on what Jackie said. So you think about the farmer who raises pigs. So weighing the pig isn't going to create the outcome that he's looking for. Feeding the pig is going to fatten the pig and get them ready for market to get the most money for that pig. So we can weigh him all day long, but if we're not feeding him, he's not going to get the outcome he wants. So the same thing with kids. If all we're doing is assessing, we're not going to get the results in the student outcomes that we're looking for. So we're going to go through these types of assessments, and it may be beneficial that if you have a Post-it or a scrap piece of paper, that you kind of think about your district and what are you using in these various categories of assessments, and just jotting them down as we're talking. Because at the end of this, we're going to have a discussion, and we're also going to show you a planning tool that you can use with your district to kind of map out what assessments you're using, and then make decisions on, do we need to keep all these? Are there some we can get rid of? Are there some that aren't as effective, or they're not testing the areas that we need them to test? So it's that weeding out process that you would you might want to go through with a team in your district. So jot down what you're using currently in your district under each of these categories. So the first kind is that very broad screening assessment. So those are, they're supposed to be brief, it's standardized measured, it's that indicator of that mild, moderate, severe risk, emergent language and literacy skills. Some might predict a student's future performance, and they help teachers and administrators kind of marshal those resources for instruction and intervention. So these are given to all kids. These might also be called like benchmark assessments or interim assessments. They will determine those kids who are at risk. So this is like when you go to your doctor and you're going for that checkup and they send you through a battery of tests just to make sure that you're okay. So it's kind of the same thing. We're going to give it to all kids just to do those checking points. All right, these would be given to all kids at least 3 times per school year. And they're intended to be like proactive in identifying students before they experience reading difficulty. So it's to catch them early, like we talked about before. You know, if we can catch them early, like in kindergarten level, we can close that gap really quickly with a very few minutes a day. But if we wait till 3rd grade, now we're looking at hours of intervention that we just don't have in our day.
So when we think about screening assessments, we really want to know what the screener is able to do and not do in order to really know how we need to utilize the tool. So it can predict long-term outcomes, a screener can. It can identify students who are at great risk, and it can help us select those direct resources that we need. However, what a screener will not do is it will not precisely diagnose why a student is having difficulty. Okay, and it will not identify all skill areas, all the subsets that we know are components of the big ideas of reading in order to, you know, address instruction appropriately. Okay, so it's going to give us more of that overarching, you know, almost of a like an outcome type feel results. Okay, so if we're using screening as screening assessments to be the data to make our IEP goals or for our RIMPs, then that might be a bit of a red flag. You know, we might need to dig a little bit deeper.
So those examples of screening, we already talked about MAP. It also might be a STAR. It might be Ames Web. It might be DIBEL. So those are all examples of screening assessments. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's just an example. So going back to the analogy with the doctor's office, so they get the test back and something comes back not quite right. All right, so then a doctor may order another battery of tests that are more specific because of this red flag that was drawn by those initial tests that he gave you in the doctor's office. So this is when we're going to do that formal diagnostic, and it's prescriptive, you know, it's very, very detailed about their mastery in very specific skills. This is going to take more time than a screening test. It's given to some students and not all students, and it should probably be given one-on-one. Somebody with more accurate information that can enhance the language and literacy support. So who is going to provide those assessments? This is a deeper level of insight into a student's reading difficulties. This is where it will identify all those components under word rec. Where are the gaps there? When we looked at all those components of language comprehension, where are the gaps? It should specifically identify the strengths and weaknesses of each of those skills, excuse me. So it'll look at, you know, the strengths and weaknesses in phonemic awareness, phonics, spelling, fluency, comprehension. All of those things should be looked at in a diagnostic tool. So when we're also looking about diagnostics, there are informal and there are formal diagnostics. So when we're looking at formal, that's going to be a detailed information about their mastery of a skill. It'll provide teachers with more accurate information and will enhance language and literacy supports. Informal might be the past, which David Kilpatrick has is an Equip for Reading Success. That's an informal diagnostic. Letters has a phonics and word reading survey that you could give that's informal. Really Great Reading Company has a phonics assessment that is informal. And Assessing Reading, which multiple measures of the core, is another informal way that you can assess.
That's this book right here. And like we said, guys, we're gonna make sure that we follow up with a list of these resources so that you're not going crazy trying to jot all of these down. But this is a really great tool. I think that something like this, you know, we can't just tell our teachers that, oh, we need to have here, you need to make sure that you dig further and have a diagnostic, right? We as administrators have to have the materials and resources available to our staff so that they have the ability to reach in, identify those intervention or those skill deficits so that they can immediately start providing interventions. So as district leaders, we have to have a robust, you know, compilation of these assessment options and materials available. In assessing readers, I just want to point out one part of this. This book is great because as you start to pull apart different things that you want to do to, you know, figure out what assessments you have and you don't have, there is what they have. They have these diagnostic plan maps at the beginning, right? So what that means is, so let's say you started with a student, you provided a standardized comprehension test or core reading comprehension test, okay? And the results said that they were at grade level. And this has an arrow that says, okay, no further assessments are needed, okay? But if they were, you know, if their scores came back and they were identified below grade level, it tells you what assessment you could do next based off of what was reported as low. Right, and if you do that assessment and they're on grade level, then you need to work on X skill. And then it just kind of walks through. So this is, you know, these diagnostic plans would be something that, you know, you and your teams could create based off of the assessments and resources that you use at your buildings. And it would be a great way for a teacher to pick up and look at, you know, the data with a team, with a TBT or something to know what the next step should be. The authors of this on the chat, someone asked, I think it's like a kind of an array. It's from the Core Literacy Library. I think I want to say it's like Kilpatrick in addition to some other individuals. I don't think it's one specific author. But like I said, we'll make sure that we link to this in the follow-up email. Okay, so we talked about screeners and we talked about diagnostics. And then another important component is that, you know, once we get a baseline understanding of where our kids are performing and we start to prescribe maybe, you know, additional resources in tier 1 or we do interventions in tier 2 or tier 3, we have to have a way of progress monitoring. So Debbie, do you want to open us up with your thoughts about progress monitoring?
Yeah, so to me, the progress monitoring should be very quick. I also feel that all kids should be progress monitored, not just the ones that are in intervention. Based on the needs of the child, you may need to progress monitor more frequently for some students than others. But you know, my kids that are working at grade level, I also need to make sure that I'm progress monitoring them. Are they continuing to make the progress that they're needed to stay on grade level? So I need to be doing those very, very quick checks. They should be very, very fast. And then those kids that we're trying to close the gap, all right, so they need to make more growth. And so we have that very explicit tier 2 instruction, tier 3 instruction on top of core 1. Are we closing the gap? Because if not, we need to revisit it. So why is the gap not closing for those kids? Are we not using the right interventions for them? Because we need to work very, very quickly to close that large gap with those kids. So there's going to be some differences in the way we're going to do it with whole class, which would be very informal, very, very quick check. Are my kids progressing the way they need to stay on grade level? And that those that are getting that tier 2 and tier 3, are they really growing at a faster rate so that they can get caught up? So that progress monitoring is going to be critical for all kids. But again, they need to be really fast and they don't need to be formal. You know, go ahead.
Sorry, someone got kicked out. I was going to say, in regards to that for progress monitoring, when it comes to tier 2 and tier 3, you know, I think we oftentimes have this disposition that, okay, we're just measuring where they are on this goal using, you know, this tool. Whatever, like that progress monitoring assessment probably was previously identified of how that would be monitored. But, you know, to piggyback on what Debbie said, is we're really using progress monitoring to also reflect on, am I doing the right thing, right? Is the specially designed instruction that we selected as an IEP team, is it appropriate, right? So as we continue to dive into evidence and practices around literacy and language, and we really have our teams have a robust understanding of the scope and sequence of, you know, the reading continuum, the better the teams are going to be able to, one, more explicitly identify specially designed instruction that each child needs according to their sub skills, but then have a really, you know, more effective way of collecting that progress monitoring, right? I think we kind of can get in the weeds with this because the Oprah effect tends to happen, right? We have one or two basic things that we use, and then we don't have enough monitoring tools in place or available for our teachers that they're kind of, I guess, measuring more broad skill sets as opposed to really getting in there and knowing that they're using this progress monitoring tool to meet this specific deficit. So the more specific we can get, the better. And then that can let us know if what, you know, the choices that we're making are appropriate for each learner.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, when we're looking at frequency, as we're progress monitoring, those kids that are getting that tier 3, that really intensive intervention, we should probably be progress monitoring every week for those kids. For those kids in tier 2, every 2 weeks at minimum, we should be doing a quick check to make sure, you know, as Jackie was saying, that we have the right interventions in place to get that child to grow and close the gap. And then for our other students, we should be doing probably a monthly check to make sure that they are progressing as they need to stay at grade level.
I think it's important to caveat here too, the term progress monitoring, I guarantee that all of the teachers at your various districts probably have a slightly different definition of what the term progress monitoring is, right? So we're kind of using this more loosely and more broad across our entire system of support, knowing that, you know, this might be a check for understanding, this might be a exit ticket, this could be a you know, a component of a program at the end of the unit where it has like a few skill sets. It could be a very, you know, kind of similar to that of a mini screener, diagnostic screener. It could be the measuring of an IEP goal, and there was one other one I wanted to bring up. Oh, it could be something that we call like CBMs, right? And that vocabulary can look a little bit different, or maybe kind of run the gamut across progress monitoring and diagnostics, right? So it's more important that we look at the intent of the assessment as opposed to really trying to like explicitly label it. So why are we doing this, and is it going to help us improve instruction and make gains for each child or each tier, as opposed to trying to figure out what we need to call it. So just don't want everyone to get in the weeds with the terms.
And Ames Web, Acadians, Dibbles, they all have progress monitoring assessments built into their system. So maybe some of you are using that, but they all have that built in.
Okay, and then the last assessment, we're not going to spend a ton of time here because these are the more like end of course type of assessments, but these are called outcome assessments. So this just is that bottom line evaluation of the effectiveness of a reading program, usually in relationship to other reading programs or districts or schools. Okay, so we could have end of course assessments, alternate assessment, third grade, reading guarantee. KRA would not be an outcome assessment, but these are more of those state higher level, you know, outside maybe agency assessment tools. Ames Web, all of our career tech, WebEx assessments, those all would fall as outcome assessments. So basically, in a nutshell, outcome assessments give us more of an idea of where we compare across districts and schools, help us identify our various subgroups, but we should not be using them to, make big, robust educational choices for instruction. We may, however, use them though to help with, the curriculum selection process, or where we might need additional resources or materials. It's more of a bigger unit thing. And like I said, there were some examples there that were already mentioned.
So when we're looking at this, what should be assessed? So as you're looking at your assessments, it will be really important to make sure that you are looking at phonological awareness, that you're looking at phonics and spelling, that you're looking at oral passage reading, that ORF skill, both in accuracy and fluency, that you have oral language and listening comprehension, that vocabulary apart from reading is also addressed, and there should be obviously passage reading comprehension. Retell, it can be oral, but all of those need to be assessed around those big fives of learning. So planning for assessment, we have this great document that you can use to plan your assessments and kind of map them out. We have that linked in the Padlet for you, that you can use it to put in the assessments that you're using. But we have an example here. So as we're planning for assessments, the first one we're looking at is phonological awareness. All right, so then we move across the right, screening. So do we have a screener? Do we have a way to progress monitor? Do we have a diagnostic? So as we're going through the screening device, phonological awareness, that would be tier 1. So that would be for all kids, should be assessed in phonological awareness. And as you're moving to the right, then do we need to do any PD around this for our teachers? Do they have the adequate knowledge around phonological awareness, around the assessment, and how to use it to strengthen student outcomes? And then what grade bands do we use this in? All right, so if we're testing phonological awareness, we're definitely going to hit that pre-K, K2 for the screening. All right, progress monitoring, then we're also going to progress monitor pre-K all the way through grade 12. Is that interesting? And that we should have some diagnostic assessments as well.
In the event that that's the identified skill set, that's a deficit.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So when we're looking at our assessments, we're going to just kind of, walk through a casual discussion with you guys, but also it's important to note that we need to deselect any assessments before we start adding new assessments, right? So this is a very difficult process to do that would need to take place with a team of individuals who have an understanding of the assessment tools that you have available and why they've been selected. But there are going to be some times where you're going to have tools that maybe you need to deselect, but you might not be aware that they're even being utilized, right? So this is just an opportunity for planning for assessment, but then we want to make sure that each of those assessments are also accessible to all learners. So Debbie, did you want to kind of piggyback from what you had just said as it relates to showing how we can access for all?
Yeah, so when we're talking about all, we do mean all kids in the district, and we have linked a resource also in the Padlet on how we can make things more accessible to all of our kids. So we've got this first sound fluency assessment, and we use visual phonics or finger spelling. So if we're talking about children with a disability who are deaf or hard of hearing, how are we going to make that assessment accessible to them? All right, so when we're talking about all kids, we are talking about all kids. So there is visual phonics and there is finger spelling that we can use with those children to test their first sound fluency. That will give us a good indication of where we need to go next in instruction to get robust reading for those kids. All right, if we have learners with complex motor differences or learners building communication skills, all right, so if we're also still working on that first sound fluency, We've got speech sound cards or mouth cards. Maybe we have the devices with the mouth cards and the phonemes already programmed into the device. But we need to make sure as we're looking at a district that we make these assessments accessible to all of our learners in our building. Because going back to that presumed competence that we talked about earlier, that we can get 90 to 95% of all of our kids reading close to grade level if they have that systematic explicit instruction, and assessment has to be part of that.
So as usual, I think we've inundated you guys with a lot of information in a short amount of time. And I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie, but just for logistical purposes, she's going to start guiding us through an informal discussion. But I wanted to let you guys know which things will help support you in this discussion in the Padlet. Okay. So in session 3, you can scroll down. There's a group discussion, assessment guiding questions. Okay, I'm going to drop that link in. So you want to have access to this assessment guiding questions. And then the example that Debbie just went over for phonological awareness is a component of the Planning for Assessments tool she was referring to. So underneath that is that Planning for Assessments resource. I'll drop that in. This is a tool to evaluate what tests you need across those big emphasis or the big ideas of reading. So there's that. And then I am going to drop in the accessibility example that she went over. Okay, this is specific. This is a specific example related to DIBELS test. So looking at the various subgroups that are components of DIBELS, this shows you possible supports based off of the assessment component of DIBELS and the type of disability that child may be identified as having and supports that could be used. With the caveat knowing that just because a student is deaf or hard of hearing does not mean that these are accommodations that they always will need or may work for them. So these are just suggestions, but they're not going to work for every student simply due to their identified area of disability. All right. Debbie,
So Jackie, can you bring up the guiding questions again, please?
No problem.
So these assessment guiding questions, they were taken from the Principal's Primer for Raising Reading Achievement, came out of this book here, which we can, I mentioned it there, but we'll also link it. It is part of LETTERS, if you're familiar with the LETTERS program. Not a program, I'm sorry, but LETTERS work around reading. But this is where this came from. And these are the questions that we need to be thinking about as we are looking at our assessments across the district. So having just a discussion around those topics is where we want to go now. So when you think about the assessments that you're using in your district, are you finding that it's valid and reliable? So what are just your general thoughts on that as you're thinking about the assessments that you're using in your district?
Oh, wait, Deb, didn't you want to give them 5 minutes?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
so what you're going to do is from the 3 links that I just sent you guys, you're going to go through those guiding questions. If you want to put your focus towards that planning tool, but we're going to give you 5 minutes. We'll all just turn off our cameras. And when that 5 minutes is over, we're going to ask everyone to turn their cameras on and we'll have a discussion, kind of just any big takeaways, thoughts, whatever, just an informal discussion as a whole group based off of your guys's feedback you'd like to hear from multiple districts. So we're going to put 5 minutes on the clock. We'll come back at 10:10.
Jackie, can you hear me?
Yes.
I got kicked out, and when I came back, I'm not sure what's happening now.
Okay, what are you missing? What are you?
Are we
You
in
have
small
the-
groups?
Bill, do you have the
Oh.
assessment guiding questions that she put in the chat, or does she need to put them in again?
No, I have the guiding question. I just don't know what I'm doing right now. Like, what's my
Okay,
direction?
so, oh yeah, got you. I'm sorry. You'll just look over, so either one of those 3 resources. And then Debbie's going to, when we come back together at 10:10, we're just gonna have an informal discussion about some of those guiding questions as it relates to what we're seeing, if we have any questions, if we wanna post something to the group, whatnot.
Thanks.
Mhm. Okay, we have about 2 minutes. One minute. When you come back, please turn your screens on. Debbie, since the group is a little bit bigger than it was in past weeks, do we want to use the chat to put a comment, like if you would like to comment to start the conversation or anything? Might be an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that. Okay, so we're just looking for an informal conversation with you about this whole idea of assessment and these guiding questions and your responses to it and how things are going in your district and next steps. So anything you want to chime in, if you want to react to somebody's comment, please feel free to throw it in the chat, ask questions. But does anybody want to kick us off?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I think we can agree that the bulk of this work needs to happen in Tier 1, right? So, and that is probably the hardest tier to get up and running in terms of the use of all of the assessments. And I think it was Jackie that said, you know, we need to be smarter than our curriculum. I feel like in our school district, we have a lot of good things happening. But I'm wondering where you all land on the use, the smart use, and well, the smart development and use of teacher-made formative assessments as part of that progress monitoring piece. Because when we identify gaps, one of the gaps in our assessment plan So one of the drawbacks is let's not wait until we find a formative, like a formal assessment. Let's get the information now, and while we're looking for a formal assessment. So I just wondered if you could speak to the use of teacher-made formative assessments in terms of this reading plan.
Does anybody want to speak to that, or? Okay, well, if you would like to, just put a thought in the chat. But like the first thing that comes to mind for me, Bill, is when we're looking at formative assessments, do our teachers have a process in place to create them? Because like you said, that oftentimes that's kind of what we're having to do. And do we have a way for them to have the capacity and have representation of each learner at the table to help create those assessments aligned to these foundational skills of reading, in addition to the standards that we're measuring at each grade level? So I don't necessarily think, you know, like you said, in a perfect world, yeah, we would love to have these identified assessments, but the reality is we're gonna have formative assessment checks and things in place that are gonna look different across not only grade levels, but also content areas. So if we're going to ask our teachers to do that, and that's how we want to kind of get those, you know, opportunities to have those progress monitoring things, do we have a way of really providing validity around that, as well as like the fidelity of providing it and implementing it? Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah.
And I think this actually, the assessment guiding questions can be used in a way as kind of a rubric for, hey, where does your, you know, teacher-made formative assessment fit in this plan, until we can find one that has more sort of research data behind it. Thanks.
I like what you said too about until we can find something, because I feel like that's where leadership comes in, because teachers are not curriculum writers, they're not assessment creators, you know, and so when we're asking teachers to do that, there's a danger in that, you know. Sometimes it's necessary, and there are some certain things obviously that they do need to do those tests, but when we're looking at those very foundational skills, especially that's going to set our kids up for success in the future, that I really feel that is on leadership to make sure that we get those good assessments in place as quickly as possible, so that our teachers can really focus on the instruction. Like, how do I differentiate this instruction to meet the needs of all my kids, rather than sitting down and writing the curriculum and creating the assessments? They should really be working on that instruction piece versus those pieces. So I like what you said about until, you know, we can get that in place.
I think too, it's important when you're talking about those kinds of assessments that there's a lot of communication, because you want everybody on the same page. So, you know, this happened in a building I was working in. You know, one teacher was using one type of assessment for phonemic awareness, and another teacher was using another type of assessment, and another teacher was using a different kind of assessment. So everybody was using something different, you know, and so it's kind of like we had to bring the team together and say, okay, let's look at these assessments. Which one is the most reliable and will give you the most valid results, and let's select this one, you know, as a team. Because everybody had their own, like I said, and not that any of that they all weren't okay. It's just, it's better if as a building, if you're going to make, you know, decisions on what kind of assessment to give, that, you know, everybody comes to the table and agrees that this is what we're going to use. Because sometimes teachers, you know, they do have a good assessment that, you know, we weren't aware of. So let's pick this one. And, but it's hard when you're in a building and everybody's using something different, because then you feel like, you know, there's no consistency, because when you're looking at the results, you're like, so where did you get this? And, you know.
What a great opportunity that presents for teachers to actually sit down and have the conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's like, which one of these are, right? I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I've learned, you know, sometimes when you're given a directive, you know, as a teacher, you're like, well, that's not really what I wanted to use, and I want to use this, and having the conversation of having them all out on the table, and then, the teachers kind of mull it over and select which one, then it's more of a collaborative effort. And then everybody is buy-in. Because like you said, we have to assess less and teach more. And so if everybody is in agreement with what assessment is going to be given, then you won't get any kind of resistance. So we know that sometimes happens too.
And then I'm thinking on that, Amy, as you're looking at a BLT, if we're all looking at the same data, you know, from the same, like it's so much easier to make those decisions about where to close the gap, but where when we're using all these different assessments, that's a little bit harder to hone in on where the gap is occurring.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's exactly where this stemmed from. It was from TBT. Everybody brought in their own data and it was kind of hard to collaborate because it was all different resources. And we had a hard time coming to a consensus. Yep.
Thank you. Other thoughts? I think I saw some people unmute, or it looks like you were putting your earplugs in, getting ready to share.
I have another question.
Please.
So, yeah, so I think we're not alone in using STAR, reading and early literacy assessments for screeners at least 3 times a year. But Renaissance has added CBMs to that platform. And although I've asked our reading specialists to take a look at it, because I don't want to dive into an assessment without first studying it. I'm wondering if anyone here has used those already and if you have an opinion about them. Is that an appropriate question to ask, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you guys to learn from each other. So he's looking for someone who uses the CBM component of the STAR assessment.
Bill, I've wondered the same thing. I haven't dove into it too much, but we also use STAR, and that was a question that I posed. So I was wondering the same thing, if anyone uses it.
We haven't. If when I want to try it, but when we do, I'll share.
Any other questions, comments that you have around assessment or the guiding questions?
Well, I think it gives everybody a good place to start. This is something I'm going to bring to my team just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So thanks, this is a good resource.
I think, one of the things I think when I think back to when I was in the classroom, I saw assessment as this thing that we just had to do that was pretty annoying. And especially being like an intervention specialist, it was like, this isn't really showing me anything. I don't really even know if my kids are able to access this material. So I think having teachers talk about the why of each assessment, I think can be really impactful. And then how they can participate in regards to access, so if I'm an intervention specialist, it would be helpful if, I was at the table at the beginning. Maybe I thought, that TBT doesn't really apply to me. They're talking about, the universal screener and all of my kids are already receiving tier 3. Well, we need you there to tell us how we can provide access so that this data can, portray some meaning to you. Same thing would go with EL or maybe even some of our gifted groups, because, as we know, gifted learners might outscore. And so then that data becomes kind of, I don't want to say useless, but it can be seen as non-beneficial because it really can't help guide instruction if we don't have access, whether that be, on the tip of some of our students with the most complex needs to our students with gifted and talented abilities.
I also think that in what we're currently dealing with in our current situation, looking at the validity of assessments in an online virtual platform has been challenging as well. And so, yes, we use NWEA or STAR, but how are we administering those, and are they valid? And does that data, is it useful, or are we going to rely more on our teacher-led formative assessments to drive our instruction, because we know at least that parents aren't helping, or that's that one-on-one and that information is more valid.
How are the rest of you dealing with online assessments?
It's not easy because we have, parents, I'm speaking in the primary sense because we gave MAP, and we had cameras set up so we could actually watch the students as they're taking assessments, because we only did like 5 at a time. And some students were fine, they were trying their best. Other students, the MAP was extremely difficult for them, so they were crying. And so then parents are trying to console them and give them the answers. And then as a teacher, you have to say, we're sorry, you can't give them the answer. So there's some buildings that their data is not valid right now. Like the MAP data, we can't really go by it. One building has the highest scores they've ever had. And they've never, I'm like, no, that's not right. So we're trying to go through these muddy waters. It's not easy for primary. Now I can't say the same, I don't know for upper grades, if it was a little bit easier, but for like K1, 2, and even 3rd grade, just using a Chromebook and the whole platform was difficult. So that was our experience. Some kids did okay, but some kids didn't.
Amy, we were in a little bit, in general, we were lucky enough to bring our kids in for their diagnostic test, their STAR diagnostic test. Our kids that are 100% remote, we're in a hybrid situation right now. So we have a population of kids that are 100% remote. So we brought them in to do their STAR testing for their diagnostic in the fall. Within the hybrid model, time is like crazy, right? It goes so fast. So we ended up taking off like the password, the admin password to the STAR test, because we had so many aides helping us administer and just getting around to kids. And we found that some were actually taking the test at home. And just like you said, the parents were helping. So we very quickly put that admin password back on. But yeah, same thing. The parents were basically sitting there with a child that was in like the 9th percentile. Suddenly they were in the 97th percentile. So that was kind of our experience. Like, we're grateful that the parents see the value in it, but at the same time, it's not the purpose, so that was our experience.
That is part of the reason why I bring up the idea of the quick formative assessments. You have all your kids on the screen, and you just need to know X. So hey, kids, write it down on a piece of paper, hold it up. It's the best that we can do at this point, in some respects. But my mantra is, don't wait, like assess, like don't you need some information, so however you can get it. So I think we're all looking forward to a time when we can go back to relying on our data the way that we want to.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll definitely put all these resources in the chat, and or not in the chat, but we'll put them in the responsive email, and then we'll also put them in the Padlet for you. But we're probably going to need to move on because we do need to talk about our February meeting as well. Do you want to talk about that, Jackie?
Sure. Once again, thank you guys for participating in our reflection tool. So the exit survey, it's going to ask you, one, how you liked this. In the past, in our last couple of sessions, we created groups and tried to structure those conversations a little bit more. But we, from your comments, some of you wanted to have more of a whole group approach to some of this. So please, like, your feedback, we need to know what you guys want, because this is ultimately for you. And as we grow, we'll use your feedback to really make this more of a network for you guys to be able to collaborate. So one part of that, though, is the exit survey has a question on it related to our February session. So our February session is unfortunately a date that something came up with the department that we are unable to fulfill that date. So what we've done on the first question of the survey is giving you two options. So if you would prefer to reschedule, you can select a date that works best for you, and we'll do our best to accommodate the group on getting a new date on the calendar. Or what Debbie and I can do is put together like, you know, an hour of content for you, and then, you know, record it, send it to you guys that way, so you can, you know, view it on your own time throughout the month. And then that opening discussion for our March date would kind of be like what we did today, you know, talking about that content. So it's really based off of, you know, the majority of how the group feels we should move forward. So just go ahead and select which one is most applicable to you. And we're going to take the last 3 minutes of our time today to give you an opportunity to complete that survey. So I just dropped that in the chat. And as you do that, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat or unmute. We do only have 1 minute left, so I know you guys, a lot of you are in the survey. I'm just going to take a quick pause. I'm going to remind you of a few other resources we have here for you, and then we'll let you go. We want to honor your time. We wanted to make sure that you were aware that we have additional networks. So we have this Literacy Leaders Network. Invite anyone you want. This stuff can't be done just on your shoulders, so please feel free to invite anybody. It doesn't matter if they hop in later in the, you know, in the season or the series or not. We also have an adolescent literacy network that's available. And then coming up soon, we have a complex needs series to really help with providing access for individuals with complex needs. That first date, February, the person that was running that unfortunately is fallen a little bit ill, had surgery, so we're postponing that first date in February, and we'll loop back to that. But then for now, the first session is going to start on March 17th, and Debbie's a partner in that. Then there is a Heggerty training coming up in February this month, or actually next, or a month from now, and then STAR at Home. That's Sit Together and Read. This is a way of getting families involved in the discussion, and there's two components to that. There's a teacher component, things that they need to do to be a part of that program, and then there's a home component, how parents can provide that program at home. So there's 2 sessions for that. It's February 19th and March 12th. And then if you have not already, we really encourage you to sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter in the area of literacy. Just on our website, there's a newsletter tab, and there's a level up for literacy component. Even if you don't have an opportunity to always, you know, read them to their fullest amount, it's always around a specific topic, and we really try to embed resources that can be applied in the instructionally as well as system-wide resources in every single issue. And so go ahead and get signed up for that. We've had a topic on educator capacity. We've had a topic on shared leadership. And then this next one that's going to be coming up is around multi-tiered systems of supports. So a lot of the content you'll see is going to align directly to this network. I think that's it. We'll stick around for a few minutes. Thank you so much for coming. Please make sure that you complete that survey, and we'll let you guys know in the follow-up if we'll see you in February or if we'll meet again in March.
Thank you.